focuses primarily on project management, team building, and facilitation. She has spoken at many PMI conferences, including PMI EMEA, France, and Italy. So we are very excited about having her with us today, and I will pass it to Dana.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Wow, we are here today to talk about no more slackers on your project team. How many of you have slackers on your team? Okay. How many of you are the slacker on your team? I found it's so common. Just those people who are kind of dead weight, they're not quite with the program. We really need to figure out how we're going to deal with them. The thing that I found that has been so successful, in addition to dealing with them individually, is building what I call a culture of accountability. And that's what we're going to talk about for the next hour or so. So here are our learning objectives. I really want to define it. What do I mean by a culture of accountability within the team? So I want to be sure you're really with me in terms of that. But beyond that, I'm one of these speakers that I don't necessarily believe in a whole lot of sizzle, get y'all rah-rahed up for the next hour, but then when you get back to work, you don't necessarily have any real tools and tricks and tips to actually implement. So I want to give you some real techniques that you can start using almost immediately. And then a lot of those techniques are going to deal with the entire team, because that's what we're talking about when we talk about that culture. But I also want to give you some techniques to deal with people one-on-one, okay? Because sometimes you've got a more systemic issue and you want to focus on the system. But let's face it, sometimes you've got an individual issue and you need some techniques and tips for how to deal with that as well. So with that, I think we learn not necessarily by listening to the person in front of the room, but also learning from each other, hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I want to start with a real scenario, which I know when I was a project manager probably happened to me on a weekly basis, if not more. See if I'm not the only one in the room who's had this happen to them. You're in the back of the room, getting ready to start another project status meeting, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're pouring your coffee, Luke Jones comes running up to you. Dana, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I had a chance to catch up with you. It's just been so crazy. I know we're getting ready to start the meeting, but I just wanted to let you know, I know that I said I was going to get that information sent to the team for the meeting today, but I just didn't get a chance to do it. Have you heard that before? Yes, some version of that. Oh my goodness, there was a website crash fiasco. I know you heard about that. I got pulled into that, and I was having to pull late hours. So I know, I said I was going to, get you all that information by today, but just didn't get a chance to do it. So my question to you is, if you're the project manager, when you turn to Luke Jones in that moment, what do you say? Okay? So we're going to do this in a little bit of a team case scenario. I want you guys to talk about it. So this is going to be continuing the networking. I know we've been doing a lot of networking today, which is wonderful. So meet and greet the person or people sitting on either side of you. And I'd like you to get into groups of, maybe 3 to 5 and just talk about it. And what I want you to talk about and then later on share with the larger group, not what you'd want to say or what you hope you would say, but what do you really think you would say in that moment? So again, don't give me what you think is the right answer. Give me what you think you really would say in that moment. So we'll do about 5 minutes of you guys chit-chatting, and then we'll share and see what you guys have come up with. All right, and let me give you a few options before we jump into your answers. Option number 1, hey, Luke, don't worry about it. We're all running from one crisis to another. Please just get it to me as soon as you can. Option number 2, I really appreciate your letting me know, when do you think you can get it done, given your workload and everything you've got on your plate? Option number 3, I can't believe this. Why didn't you let me know about this earlier? Option 4, this is not acceptable. You need to get it to me by the end of the day. Or something else, something completely different, your own customized response to him. Okay, take about 5 minutes, talk about it, and then we'll hear from you guys. Okay. Let's see what you guys talked about. And let me just say that there is not necessarily a right answer. It's going to depend on a few different factors. I probably have, said one version of each one of these at some point in my career, so it's not necessarily that there's one right answer. But I just want to get into this discussion a little bit because I think this is a classic scenario that a lot of project managers face, or at least I'll speak for myself. It was a classic scenario that I faced where I felt like I was constantly pulled between trying to develop the team, but also trying to clamp down on people who weren't really pulling their weight and trying to deal with these sorts of situations effectively as they arose. So I'm really interested to see what you guys talked about. So, volunteer, would you say? Yes.
Kind of had some combination of all of this, but the thing that we added was that we would then let them know what the consequences of their actions were on the team and on themselves.
So we want to ensure that they understand, Luke, because we don't have the vendor names today, unfortunately, that's going to delay our selection process. So I do want to be sure that you understand that. So a little bit of guilt, I feel, kind of going there. We want to be sure they understand those consequences. Okay, I see people nodding. What else? Yes?
Like she said, we were a little bit all over. I believe 2 was closer to where we were at, but we took it a different angle.
Okay.
While Luke 1 should have communicated this earlier, but part of being a project manager is getting status reports. Should we have taken some responsibility ourselves and checked in with Luke?
Okay.
See where he was at.
So maybe there's a mutual responsibility element here. Usually you're slackers, it's not a complete surprise. So maybe what I'm hearing you say a little bit is maybe I should have proactively checked in. Maybe I couldn't trust that he's going to show up on Friday with everything done. Maybe I should have been checking with him on Wednesday just to ensure we didn't have any issues at the meeting. Wonderful feedback. What else? All good comments.
You had the same situation you asked him. 2 days in, really? You know we ready? Yep, got it. Same discussion.
Well, now he's a liar on top of being a slacker. Okay, what else? Yes.
We talked about it kind of depends on who it is and how often they do it. I mean,
Okay,
somebody that does it
certainly.
Annually, it would be, I would treat very differently than somebody that did it on a rare occasion.
Isn't it almost similar to parenting? To a certain extent, you try to look at the situation and handle things on a case-by-case basis. This is the first time in 10 years they've ever, dropped the ball or been late versus do they have an excuse every week? It's the same thing over and over. Very important point. What else? Yes?
I say when you form the project in the beginning, if you set some ground rules and you set your expectations. So such things, to avoid such things that somebody's letting you know last minute.
You've been reading ahead. We want to prevent it, and that's some of what we're going to talk about today, because I think it is multifactorial. I think we have a responsibility as a PM to try to set that environment, and that's what we're going to talk about with a culture of accountability, but clearly they have responsibility as well, so we don't want to abdicate or allow them to abdicate their responsibility. Other ideas? Yes?
So we're kind of with number 4, that, letting them know that it wasn't acceptable.
Ooh.
That,
We're afraid of him.
that
He said number 4.
we want to get the product, we want to put it back on them to get us the product, but then we want to also let them know, you should have let us know earlier, you should have repassed.
Okay. Number 4. And I've done this many, many, many times, so it's really interesting to see the numbers that people select, just out of curiosity. I've never really done this before, but just out of curiosity, he's saying number 4. I'm just wondering, how many of you feel like you would like to say number 4? but feel like you'd be more likely to say number 1 or number 2. And I would probably admit to that when I was a PM. I think that's what I felt. That's kind of a little bit of the internal struggle that was going on with me. Let me offer you one way to approach it. And again, I say this is not necessarily the panacea for every situation, but let me tell you what I started developing, and it relates a lot to what this young woman said back here about establishing ground rules, making sure the consequences are clear, all of those sorts of things. So I turn to him and I say, Luke, thank you so much for letting me know about that. I appreciate it. Which action item was that? Which number was that? Because again, I'm going to have a precedent of documenting these action items. Oh, that was number 37. Great. When we get to number 37 during our readout, please just give your update to the group. Now, what have I done with that response? I put it back on him. Because I promise you, if he's running up to me 5 minutes before the meeting's about to start, telling me he didn't do what he told me he was going to do 2 weeks ago, all he's doing, in essence, is attempting to transfer the accountability of that action item from him to me. And all I've done, because he wants me to go to the team and say, oh, you know, Luke didn't get a chance to get it, but he said he's going to get it to us by Friday. So let's move to the next item. He wants me to do that, okay? All I'm doing is pushing it back to him and saying, hey, accountability, it's your item. It means you just give your update to the group. Now notice, did I condemn him and tell him he's horrible and you are going to hell and all that? You're going to burn in hell for not... I didn't do that, nor did I give him a pass, okay? Because who really needs to make that judgment? The team. And that's what I'm talking about when I say I want to build a culture of accountability within the team. Because the other issue is sometimes people will try to get into this tit for tat just with you, and it becomes really difficult because you almost feel like you're in a parent-child relationship. And I want to get away from that. I want people to feel that when they're on my team, if they say they're going to do something and take something, they're doing that not for me. It's not doing me a personal favor. They're doing that as a team member, and they're accepting that on behalf of the entire team. The other reason why I like that is teams, I found, do a wonderful job of that discernment that young man was saying back there in terms of, is this a one-time thing? Does this person do it all the time? And really deciding how hard should we come down on this person or not. Yes?
So you're going to have to deal with this outside the context of the meeting, because if I'm a slacker, I'm going to go, oops, I got to run back to the web fiasco. I just wanted to let you know this real quick for the meeting.
Ooh. I have to be honest, I don't think I've quite had that, but really it goes back to what she said before. This isn't going to be something I spring on them. This isn't going to be something they don't know about. We're going to establish a ground rule at the beginning of the team that anytime you accept responsibility for a task, it's your responsibility to always update the team and update the status. Okay? So it's not going to be a surprise. They're going to know. They're also going to know, and trust me, anybody who was on my teams knew this. The very first thing on my agenda item for all of my status meetings was review open action items. So everybody knows, first thing I'm going to do is pull out that spreadsheet and go down the list and say, number 17, who has that? What's the status? Number 18, who has that? What's the status? That in and of itself, just setting up that structure, I promise you, will diminish a lot of that slacking behavior. Because people know coming in, the first thing I'm going to do is ask you to update the team on your status. Okay? What do you think? Does that make sense? That's what and also I treat everybody fairly. Everybody fairly. Because what's the problem with number 1 and number 2? Because we feel that pull. That's kind of what we want to say, because we all can relate to that. But what's the downside? If we just kind of give them a pass and we say, oh, you know, it's okay, don't worry about it. Yes? Okay, now we may not have a firm date. Even if you do have a date, let's say he says, oh, I can get it to you, you know, in a week. And I say, oh, okay. What's the problem with that? It sets a precedent, okay? Now, it sets a precedent not just with him, everybody else. Dr. Phil said a long time ago, you teach people how to treat you, okay? And what I've started finding is if I'm a little too lenient at the beginning, next thing you know, I'm 6 months into the project, and then this one's got an issue, and this one's got to complain, and this one says they're going to be 3 days late. And, well, you gave an excuse to this one, so why can't I have, another 2 days? So I want to get out of that never-ending cycle. I want the team to decide how we're going to run the project. And I'm not saying crises don't come up, because they do, but you at least acknowledge, hey, this is what happened, I'm giving my update to the group, and then we as a team decide how we're going to move forward. Maybe we talk about the consequences, maybe we use this as a learning opportunity and we establish a ground rule, maybe we say in that moment, hey guys, what are we going to do in the future, because now because of this, we're having to slip our schedule by another week. So what can we do, what ground rule can we put in place to ensure things like this don't happen in the future? And in my team, what we did was we said, hey, anytime you've got something and you realize you're not going to be able to meet that date, it's your responsibility to pick up the phone and get another team member engaged and to take that action item on your behalf. So it was a learning opportunity for us. Okay? One of the reasons why I really like this is I think it symbolizes the struggle and the pull that a lot of team leaders and executives and project managers feel when they're in these situations, because you want to be focused on task. I mean, we're project managers, aren't we? I mean, isn't that what we're supposed to do? We're supposed to have status, we're supposed to get the task done, make sure we check off everything on our checklist. But you also want to preserve relationship. I mean, don't you want to be amiable and flexible and willing to renegotiate and hearing people out? I sat in the presentation this morning, and one of the things that came across from that was the relationship is one of the most important skills, relationship building, that a project manager can have. So would you agree with that you feel that pull sometimes? You want to do both. And so one of the things that I want you to think about is, where do you think you are on that task relationship continuum? Because most of us have a natural style. Just like most of you are usually left-handed or right-handed. One of you probably has a dominant preference, okay? So it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Like for me, I'm, probably a little bit more on the task side. You know those people who they only kind of remember your name when they need something? Or they only call you when they need something? People don't love those people. They really don't. Versus, those other people, that, they come talk to you like, oh my gosh, you look so great. Did you get your hair cut? Oh, it looks wonderful. And how's your daughter doing? Last time we talked, I know she'd had that bad ear infection. And, how did that work out? Those people? I'm like amazed by those people. It's like I barely can remember what I had for lunch yesterday. It's like, how can you remember all these things about me? But those relationships, those are the people you want to just jump through hoops for, okay? Well, just, I wasn't one of those people. I was on more the task side. And I realized over time that wasn't working for me so well. So what I did realize was the most effective project managers were in the middle. I call them the thoroughbreds. The ones on the left, task focused, those are the bulls. The ones on the right, relationship focused, those are the lambs. They get walked over half the time. The ones that are the most effective, I call the thoroughbreds, the ones that are smack dab in the middle. So one of the things I've done over my career is try to figure out, how can I move more towards the center? Okay, how can I compensate for the fact that my natural inclination is, I don't care about your weekend, I don't care about your kid, I just want my stuff, okay? Because that's kind of what's going on in my head. I mean, I don't hate you or anything, but that's just not as natural for me. Versus it's very, very natural for some other people, okay? So just as we talk, and in some of my training classes, if we were really in a training class, I'd have you put your dots up there to indicate where you were. I'm laughing because I just did a session for a technology company, and they were all task. I mean, they were so far over there, it was just amazing. But what's interesting about that is that will work for you for a certain amount of time if you're in the right environment. So for example, if you're managing and everybody on your project's a little techno-weenie just like you, and you're all very task focused, and you're like a pig in mud, because maybe they don't necessarily need some of that touchy-feely quite as much. But it won't work for you forever. It really, really won't. Also, what I've seen is as people ascend that hierarchical ladder, they go up and up and up, and now they're managing much, much larger groups. Those groups are not as homogenous, okay? So maybe before they had a small group of task people who just wanted the structure, but now we've got larger groups, and I've got relationship people in there. They want all that soft, touchy-feely stuff. They want me to come up to them and talk to them for 15 minutes before I ask for my stuff. And that might feel a little bit weird. And I'll just tell you one, again, I'm very focused on techniques. Let me just tell you one technique, just so you know how real this is for me. I was on a project at AT&T years ago, and there was this one woman on the project, and everybody knew they had to give me their stuff by Friday at 3 o'clock, okay? But there was always this one woman, and I just thought she's just Satan's cousin. I mean, that's just the way she is. It was just pulling teeth every week. It's like I'm going to have to escalate on this woman, like every Friday at 5 o'clock, I still don't have it. And so we just had just a really kind of contentious situation and relationship. And then at the end of that whole project was like, 8 months, they flew everybody to Atlanta. And so they sent us all, the project's over, and now we want to do the celebration. They sent us all out to Dave & Buster's and gave us little cards so we could play games and all that. And before that, they had like the lunch. And so at the luncheon, as luck would have it, they sat that woman right next to me at the luncheon. And we had just had this like contentious 8 months. And so I'm like, great. But now at this point, the project's over. So we don't have really, any project sort of stuff to talk about. I don't know how it happened. Somehow the subject of the young and the restless, okay, came up. And I had watched Young and the Restless for 20 years, and she had watched Young and the Restless for 20 years. We just started gabbing about, remember when Victor's first wife, Julia, and Nikki, and Jack, and all that. Literally, in about 10 minutes, we were like this, okay? And we were like laughing and saying to each other, wow, if we had just had this at the beginning of the project instead of at the end, it's not that it would have necessarily been a panacea for everything, but it would have changed how we looked at each other, how we reacted, how we responded to each other, because now it's like she wasn't Satan anymore, She was my friend because she liked the same stuff I liked. So sometimes it's amazing how little we need in terms of that icebreaker, in terms of that relationship building to just kind of get that started. And so that was very, very eye-opening for me early in my career. But ever since then, I really made a huge effort at the beginning of the project, not just to develop relationships with my team members, but also be sure they develop relationships with each other. Because the other issue is, how many of you been on teams where they've got like cliques? Yeah, I mean, you might have the Chicago clique and the technical clique and the smokers. They usually are a clique because they're all huddled outside, together. But whatever it is, sometimes that kind of bonds and brings people together. So it's so important when we're talking about these slackers is to use also techniques that balance a focus on task as well as focus on relationship. Because when we look at answers 4 or 3 and 4, or maybe even more harsh, what's the downside to being too harsh? He said no downside. Is there a downside? Let me rephrase the question. Oh, okay. Is there a downside? Do you think there's a downside? Yeah, what is it? Have you seen that where people become passive aggressive now? Oh, so that's how you want. Oh, okay, I'm gonna, get you your stuff. But now, next thing you know, it's like you could be headed for a landmine and they're not gonna warn you. They become real passive aggressive. Exactly, twist it around. And I'm so glad you said that's another reason why I want to get away from this me versus you thing. Because sometimes, again, it can become real confrontational. And also, sometimes people can try to minimize you and say, oh, it's just, she's so anal. She's so, whatever. Versus the team responds. And then now, all of a sudden, it's not one person telling them they dropped the ball. It's 3 or 4 or 5 people kind of giving them that look. Like, well, you could have picked up the phone. and, said something before now. Then they can't minimize everybody, okay? Or it's a lot harder to minimize everybody. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about this culture of accountability. I want us to develop a culture. And if you don't think your team's got a culture, you just haven't thought about it. Your team has a culture. Any team that's been together for any period of time, you've got a culture. I want to develop a culture where following through is the norm. Have you seen teams where following through is the exception? And where we just kind of expect, sometimes I call it meeting deja vu. It's like we have a meeting, we talk about something. Oh, somebody said they were going to do that, but nobody really wrote anything down. We started talking about something else. Next thing you know, 2 meetings later, the same issue comes up. And then we're like, well, didn't somebody say they were going to do something? Or didn't we talk about that last month? And it's just kind of in the ether somewhere, okay? Very common. So I want to develop a culture where no, following through is the norm. That's what we expect. Because I promise you, people will change their behavior to match the culture. It happens every time. Their meetings, in terms of when they start, that can be part of your culture. Aren't there some meetings that you go to that they start on time? But then there are other meetings. Raise your hand if you've got meetings that you know the meeting is not going to start on time, okay? You could just predict that, okay? And because you know that, then what do? You show up late. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I have a girlfriend. We used to meet for happy hour every Friday after work. And then she was notoriously late. I don't mean 5 minutes late. I mean 30 minutes late, 45 minutes late. It got to the point where I would not show up for at least 35 minutes after our scheduled time because I knew she wasn't going to be there, okay? And I didn't want to be there sitting there twiddling my thumbs. So that's what I mean. If you want to have a culture that says we start our meetings on time, you've got to do that from the very beginning, and you've got to insist on it. And what you shouldn't do is what I see a lot of people do. They try to be real lenient at the beginning because they're in that forming stage, and I'm trying to be nice, and I want people to like me and all of that. And so they start late for the first 5, 6, 7, 8 meetings, and then they're like, oh, this isn't working. And first it was just 5 minutes late. Next thing you know, it's like all the meetings are starting 15 minutes late, and it's really costing the team some time. And then they try to clamp down. So basically what they did was they were too far in the relationship side, and then they tried to swing way back over to the task side. And then the team members are looking at them like, what is wrong with her? She's acting crazy. So if anything, be real clear about those ground rules, about the environment you want to have from the beginning. And it doesn't mean you're overly harsh or you're cracking the whip, because in most cases, I'm not going to be the one to develop those. I'm going to get those from the team. We're going to talk about that in a minute, just what you said about the ground rules. But I want peers to hold each other responsible. I'm not holding you responsible. You're not my child. I want to get out of that sort of relationship. I want us to hold each other accountable as a team. The focus is on producing results, and then team members pitch in, because we do realize maybe she did have a crisis that she had to run to. But I want us to have a culture where we're willing to pitch in for one another. I want it to be team-centric as opposed to PM versus the team, and having that tension there. Now, part of this, building this culture, is exactly what these guys back here were talking about in terms of the responsibility of the project manager. You want to set your team up for success, okay, and minimize the likelihood of slacking behavior. Part of that is appropriately assigning your action items. Number 1, it must be written to be effective. Okay? Can I have anybody testify that verbal action items don't work? Okay? You must write it down, and write it down in the moment. So let's say this is one of the items that comes up during the session. One person on the team is going to compile analysis of different vendor products, features, and distribute it to the team. Okay, that's the task. What is missing? When and who? Because I promise you, when people do not do their action item, there are 2 main excuses. Oh, I didn't know it was me. You were looking at her. I didn't know I was supposed to do it. Yeah. Oh, she said, I thought you meant next month, or I got too busy. I had too much work to do. How many of you wish you had $1 for every time you heard that? So I want to eliminate each of those excuses. So after I write out the action item, and if you're on a conference call, what I do is identify somebody on the call who's going to be the scribe, and I always repeat the action items for the scribe, and I ensure that they have it written down. So after I do that, I write out the person's name. Okay, and what's your name? Okay, so Sandra. So I'm going to write out Sandra's name, and I'm going to put a box around it, okay? And then the second part is really important. I need eye contact with her. I always say, okay, I need you to look into those little beady eyes, okay? And you want to ask the magic question, when do you think you could get that done by? And then you wait for her to give you a date. That's powerful. I promise you, if you haven't done it this way, it's very powerful. So let's say she gives me a date of May 20th. So I write down May 20th. Now, why am I making such a big deal about that? I mean, what's the difference between me asking her, looking at her, and asking her to give me the date versus I'm the project manager, I know when I need stuff, versus me proposing a date and just saying, hey, is that fine? Hey, can we say May 20th? What's the difference? We'll say, maybe she'll say the 20th, but I really do need it before then. That's when I negotiate. So that's when I say, well, you know what? We want to send the report out on the 20th. We need that information from the report. So this is when I ask my second magic question. What additional support would you need to get it before the 20th? Okay. So then I negotiate in the moment to ensure she has what she needs. And also I explain why. I don't just say, oh, well, I know I need it tomorrow. I mean, you need to have my stuff tomorrow. I explain we need it for X, Y, Z, and it's really important. I want to be sure we include it. What support would you need? Maybe she needs somebody else as a backup to help her. Maybe she needs to be offloaded from some other stuff that she's doing. But whatever it is, we work with it and deal with it in that moment. Okay? Does that make sense? Do you feel like, so part of what I'm doing, again, just like you guys were so astute to say that, it's not just all about them, it's also about how you set it up and the environment that you're creating. So I want to create an environment that really supports and encourages accountability. So this is what we just talked about. You want to have a task, an owner, and a due date for every single action item. You also want to get really, really clear about what your action item management process is. So there are a few other suggestions that I want to make that relate to that. First of all, do not assign yourself action items because no one else volunteers, okay? I'm not saying, I mean, trust me, I live in the real world, okay? So I'm not saying that you as the PM should never take an action item because clearly that's not reasonable and clearly there are times when we need to do things. But if the only reason why you're taking the action item is because nobody else volunteered, that can be very dangerous. And why do I say that? Because what? Because what? Sorry. Yeah, nobody will ever volunteer. Again, you teach people how to treat you. You know, people start realizing, oh, you know, she'll take it, you know, okay, you know. Yeah, exactly, just be quiet, she'll take it. Oh, she'll take that one too, great, she'll take that one too. Next thing you know, you leave your meeting and you got all the action items. Anybody want to admit to that? I mean, I know I've done it. So you really don't want to do that. One thing I found, and I actually talk about this when I teach my facilitation classes, silence can be very powerful, okay? We are very uncomfortable, particularly Western culture, with silence. So all I generally have found you need to do is just wait long enough. Usually wait another 5, 6 seconds, and that'll do it. So if I say, example, I'll just demonstrate, hey, guys, we need somebody to call up the vendor and negotiate those rates. Anybody willing to take that on for me? I didn't even get that far, but it starts feeling uncomfortable. Maybe it already started feeling uncomfortable. It starts feeling uncomfortable after a little while, and usually you'll get a volunteer. You want to negotiate the timings. We talked about that if they suggest something inappropriate. You want to ask the team to identify ground rules around not completing things on time. So instead of waiting, we all know it's going to come up. If you're doing a 6-month project, I promise you that's going to come up. Somebody's not going to do something at some point. So instead of waiting for that to happen, maybe we should talk about it during our kickoff meeting. And we're developing ground rules. We should say, hey, guys, what if one of us takes on a task, but then somehow life intervenes, you know, a fiasco comes up, a crisis comes up, and we're not able to complete the task on time. How do we want to handle that when that comes up? What should we do? What ground rule should we develop? The other benefit of doing it that way is it's much easier to have that conversation at the beginning when there's no issue, when you're not pointing the finger at anybody in particular. So now everybody's thinking about somebody else, you know, so it's not like they're getting fussed at. They're not thinking of themselves, they're thinking of other people. So then people will sign up for all kinds of stuff like, oh, well, you know, if that happens, the ground rule should be they must call you within 24 hours, or they must swap their task with somebody else. They must find somebody else to take on the task. Maybe the ground rule is for all tasks, there's an owner and then there's a backup for every task. So that way we've already embedded some sort of redundancy into our task management system, which is the next point. The last one, provide positive feedback for consistent completion of action items effectively and efficiently. And that's the other side of the coin. Is sometimes our stars, you know, really don't get, you know, the acknowledgement that they deserve. If anything, sometimes they kind of get punished. Have you ever seen teams where you got these superstars and then they just kind of keep getting overloaded and overloaded? If I've got, you know, Sarah over here, and Lord knows she's a slacker. I can barely get her to come to meetings, but I've got him. He's my superstar. He'll knock it out of the park every single time. If I've got this new important task coming down the pike and I need to assign it to somebody and I want to be able to sleep at night, who am I going to give it to? Yeah. And so over time, what starts happening with that person? Burnout, you know. Because I know, certainly, I've worked with people that, it was amazing to me that we had this one woman on the team whose name was Mary. Well, everybody knew that Mary didn't come to work, okay? So it's really hard to, and this is before telecommuting, okay? So this was just a Mary issue. And so really, it ended up to the point where she was pretty much twiddling her thumbs because nobody really wanted to assign her anything because they knew they couldn't sleep at night because they knew it really wasn't going to get done. And so it's like work was like a vacation for her versus other people who were really, you know, the 20% who were doing 80% of the work were feeling so burnt out and stressed and overloaded because their standards were so high and they were getting really overloaded. So you really, really need to be careful about that. You want to write your action items real-time, visibly for everyone to see. Again, these verbal action items, things that are kind of in the ether, that doesn't work real well. Write it out. It must be written. And then you want to review them at the end of the meeting, even if it's a conference call. If it's now we've got, SharePoint and NetMeeting and all this kind of wonderful stuff. You can have a little sheet up there, have those action items visible, and you certainly want to read through them at the very end of the call or the meeting to ensure everyone's on board. We've talked about the next few. I love this one. Use technology to help manage the process, okay? This is one that I wrote probably 10 years ago, so I know the technology is even much, much better at this point now. We used to use a product that, I think it was eRoom. I think it was a Documenta product at one time, but it was like a collaborative workspace. And one of the things that I loved about it was it had this feature that I called virtual nagging. Okay. So it got me out of the nagging role, because as a PM, I was used to doing what somebody suggested back here, checking in. But what's the problem if you've got 10 of them, one of you, but yet you got to check on everybody's task because you can't really trust that anybody's going to do stuff on time. I see him nodding with a sob story in the back. You just don't have enough hours in the day. I mean, just do the math. If you're having a, hey, where is it, whether it's emails or phone or whatever you're having to do. So we leaned on technology. What we would do is every time there was an action item, we would log it. We would log all this information. And then it was set up so that it was kind of like Evite. You know how you can set up program Evite so that it sends a message like 3 days before the event, then 1 day before the event. So it would automatically say, hey, it would send that email 4 days before and say, hey, you've been assigned action item number 15. Please go in and update your status. So it would kind of do that in regular intervals. So I didn't necessarily have to do that. So that was really, really helpful. And don't turn into a secretary. Make them, whoever owns it. I mean, let them own it. Because I promise you, if you start doing all that little administrative work, what are you going to end up looking like in about 3 months? I mean, you're going to be like a chicken with their head cut off, doing all kinds of administrivia. So let them own it. That means it's their responsibility to go into the database and update the status or send the email out to the team or whatever needs to happen. But you shouldn't be everyone's secretary. So make sure that they own it. And then the last one I talked about, always start your status meeting with a review of the previous action items. If they know they're going to be held accountable, I promise you, they will either do what they were supposed to do, I shouldn't say always, but in most cases, do what they were supposed to do, or ensure it gets done in some other way. Most people do not want to appear to be the slacker, particularly when you're in that sort of peer environment. Questions, comments about any of that? Does it make sense? Yes? All right. Now, another key that I want to talk about is establishing that project charter very early on. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir, so hopefully most of you are using some semblance of a project charter. You may not call it a project charter. It might be a statement of work or MOU, memorandum of understanding, but you need some sort of document right at the beginning to clarify the key elements of the project and also to clarify the expectations. And one of the reasons why I say that within the context of accountability is a lot of times people will, throw their hands up in the air, not do what they're supposed to do because they claim they're confused. I just don't know what's going on, or I just couldn't figure that out. We didn't have clear communication. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, when I was supposed to do it. Again, provide that clarity, okay? How many of you, just curious, have used project charters? Yes. Okay, most of the group. So somebody just talk to me. How helpful is that? Helpful, not helpful? Yes? I see people shaking their heads, yes? Okay. Very, very helpful. The whole concept, for those of us who haven't used it, is you want to clarify as much as you can at the beginning of the project. Maybe you won't have, 100% of the information. So this can be a living document. Maybe you started at the kickoff meeting. Maybe you're able to get 75%, and then you continue to fill that out. And you also might change certain things as you need to throughout the life cycle of the project. So clearly we want to know the name, who's the team leader, the members, the sponsors, strategic alignment, how this project supports higher level goals or the overall strategy. We want to understand that. The mission, the objectives of the project, what is in scope and what is out of scope. Now, let me just say, that's something I added. Well, I added when I was working for a major company because we had been burned so many times. But why do you think I'm saying explicitly write out what's out of scope? Why not just write what's in scope, and if it's not on that list, then it's out? Why not do it that way? Eliminates gray areas. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I was doing a project for a major television network, they were developing a digital archive. And so one of the things that we were doing for them was vendor analysis because we didn't provide the product. So we were going to go out to different vendors and see what products were out there and make some general recommendations to them. But we were not going to write their RFP. I mean, their RFP was probably going to be 200 pages, very detailed, very technical. We were not going to this level of detail. Do you see how it could be confusing if we listed our scope elements and one of them is vendor analysis? Do you see how they could have been sitting there saying, they're doing all the vendor stuff. That's wonderful because, that RFP is going to take forever. So I'm so glad they're taking care of that. Okay? So this became kind of our line of demarcation to really clarify what's out, what we're not doing. Another example, when I was getting married a few years ago, I was interviewing wedding planners, because now everybody has a wedding planner. I don't know how they got married before, but I was interviewing wedding planners. So if I'm the bride and I'm interviewing the wedding planner and I'm saying to them, hey, tell me about your services, tell me what you'll do for me, what do you think was a typical response? Everything. Oh my God, you're just the bride. Oh, you're so pretty. You're just going to sit there in your little lily pad. You're not going to do a thing. I'm going to handle it all. Now, do you think they really did do everything? Not even close. So what I found was that was a useless question. Okay? The better question was what? What will you not do? Tell me what's out of scope. And it was so interesting. That same person said they do everything. I said, oh, well, just, out of curiosity, what would you consider like out of scope? Like, what would you not do? She had a laundry list. She was like, oh, well, I'm not going to be, addressing your invitations. I'm not going to be picking people up from the airport. I'm not going to be at the showers. She had a whole long list of stuff she wouldn't do. And that really kind of was helpful to me because it showed me the boundaries of those services. So same things on your project teams. Get really, really clear about where those boundaries are. Success metrics. For most of you, do you explicitly define how you will measure success on your projects? I see head shaking in the back. I see some people like, oh, no, I worked on a project, again, this is when I was with IBM. We're working with a media company, and it was a long project. It was like a year and a half long. I thought we did a great job, came in on time, on budget. We found out later they had deemed the project a failure. And my director was really hot, and so he called up our project, our counterpart over there, and asked him, well, how in the world could you say that project was a failure? It was amazing what we did. And she said, well, you know what? Our internal metric is we must recoup our capital investment within 18 months, and we didn't get our money back within 18 months, so unfortunately the project is considered a failure. And so then he was livid. He was like, we were there for a year and a half. He was like, you never mentioned that you had to recoup your money within 18 months. And what do you think she might have said? You never asked, okay? New best practice, okay? Right at the beginning of the project, you turn to that sponsor, that client, and ask one simple question. How will you measure success for this project? Okay? And I promise you, some of them will look at you like a deer in headlights, okay, and not know. But I actually have another talk called The Project Manager's Guide to Dealing with a Difficult Sponsor, because we've always got those sponsors that they don't know what they want, but they're still going to hold you responsible for providing it at the end. So even if they don't know then, I put TBD and then come back 2 weeks later and ask them the question again. But you really want to get clear on how success is going to be measured. Team member time commitments. This can be a major contributor to slacking behavior. You want to be sure that people know what they're signing up for. Because most projects I've worked with, I've had more part-time people working on the team than full-time people working on my team. And part-time is a very dangerous term, okay? Because what could part-time mean? How might someone interpret part-time if they said they need you part-time? What could it mean? Half your time? Maybe you could choose. Maybe 20 hours a week, maybe 30, maybe 5. Maybe when I get done with everything else and I'm in a great mood, I'll come over. So you really want to get clear what are the time expectations and clarify that as early as possible. You want to get more clarity around your communication plan, what the expectations are there. Ground rules, we're going to talk about ground rules, but you want to establish them very, very early on. And then what is the last magical item? Signatures. Now, why in the world do I want to do that? I want everybody to like me, so why don't I just kind of talk about it and we just kind of do a fist bump or, just kind of smile at each other? Why do I want to get signatures? That seems, archaic. commitment, accountability. You know, she could be sitting here nodding her head and saying, yeah, that's great. And I said, oh, okay, well, can I get you to sign, right here? She said, oh, well, let me, look it over and get my lawyer to read it. And, whole different level of accountability when they actually sign it. And it's so interesting because as I teach this in some of my project management classes, I've had 2 situations where people had to get up and testify. And they said, Dana, you are so right, because we actually went through that process and had one person who refused to sign, okay? And that was our problem person, okay? There was a reason, and it wasn't even necessarily them. One of the groups, they were having like some organizational issues, and so they really didn't want to commit on behalf of their organization, but they said that signing made a big difference. So let me hear from you guys. How many of you do get signatures on the charters? And I have teams ask me all the time, people mostly who are non-project managers, they're like, oh, that seems so formal, How do you do that? So let me hear from you guys. Do you think it's necessary or helpful, or do you have problems getting them? Somebody talk to me about that. Absolutely. Others? Okay. So part of them, others? Exactly. No surprises. Yes. Tell me more about that. So yeah, maybe getting those first few is kind of the hardest part, and then getting the top people to sign, and then maybe below that is a lot easier. Okay. Interestingly enough, I ask people, put on your paradigm, because a lot of times when we look at project management, we're thinking about internal projects. Think about when you're dealing with an outside vendor. How many of you deal with outside vendors? Okay. You guys, PDD, the Marriott, that's an outside vendor. Do you think maybe there's a contract involved? Or do we maybe just do a word of mouth and, spit shake? No, I bet you there is a serious contract involved. Are there signatures on that contract? Of course. So what I tend to see is if you're looking for high dollar amount issues or mission critical sorts of issues and external relationships, these are the same best practices that you would do that. I mean, you wouldn't think about not having a contract. You wouldn't think about not getting a signature if it were external. That's just standard operating practice. So what we want to try to do is infuse, there's a reason why that's standard, because, that works. And so we want to infuse some of those same best practices into our internal project management, okay? Now, what I will say, I'll grant you, every culture is different, okay? So what they do, in the construction industry and project management might be different than, I don't know, what they do in advertising. And so you do need to match your culture a little bit. I'll be honest, I've pretty much written out a project charter on a napkin at Starbucks, because that was the best we could do, was kind of get together for a more informal conversation, and then I emailed everything out, and then everyone just kind of emailed back, yes, I agree. But however you can do it, you want to talk about it, you want to document it, and you want to get that documented buy-in or signature. Yes? Very, very good question. She's saying, are you getting every team member to sign the charter? I think it varies. I want to hear you guys, but let me hear from them first, and then let me share with you my experience. But who signs a project charter from your experience? Yes? Okay, so she's saying the team members, as well as the team leaders are the key signers. Yes. Oh, just the team leads. Okay, so. Okay, so she has various team leads, so maybe 5 different teams. So the leads and above, okay? Others, who's signing it? Sponsor. To me, you definitely need to have that. And I think she spoke to that, saying, hey, having the higher levels sign it in many ways makes it easier for the lower levels to sign it as well. Okay? But I would say the key stakeholders. Certainly you need to have the sponsor sign it. Certainly you need to have the project manager sign it. For me, I had my team members sign it because part of what they were signing was the time commitments, also their understanding of their role. So I needed to ensure that they were in agreement with that as well. Anybody have anything different? No? But this is also a great technique to that point of making sure your sponsor is highly engaged, okay? Because we've got a big issue with that as well, but that's another topic for another day. So, ground rules. We talked about this from the very beginning. You want to use ground rules to reinforce the culture that you want to develop. So, these are just some sample ground rules that you might use to try to encourage that sense of accountability. First one, rotate the facilitator role. Why would I say that? Why doesn't the project manager just facilitate the meetings? I mean, it's their meeting. Gets people engaged. I mean, you don't want people showing up, kind of kicking back, putting their feet up, like, they're like a spectator. It's, your show, you run it. I'm on my iPad. You really want to rotate that role. Even if that person isn't running the meeting for that meeting, if they know it's coming around to them or if they've had to do it before, they tend to be more engaged. They tend to participate in a different way because now they respect it a lot more. They've had to do it. So you want to get them engaged. You might say, hey, you've got to notify the team leader 48 hours prior to the meeting if you're not available. Again, set that expectation. They have to be proactive. Anyone not able to attend the meeting must send a representative authorized to make a decision for them. And again, this wouldn't be something you impose, but these are just examples of some of the ones that might come out of your ground rules discussion. But you want the ground rules to come from the group, not come from you, okay? And why do I say that? Buy-in, exactly. Because trust me, it's much easier for me to enforce something, and they're going to be much more likely to do it when it came from them, as opposed to me saying, hey, these are the 20 ground rules I came up with last night. I want you guys to agree to them. That doesn't work so well. But I say, hey, I want to use your time effectively. I want to be sure we're all on the same page. I want everyone to write out a potential ground rule on a Post-it. I'm going to collect them all, and we'll go through them and see which ones we want to agree to as a group. And we've got to all agree to it in order for us to accept it as a ground rule. I love this one. This is just something actually from my past, something that our group came up with that helped us police ourselves. We had this issue, I know it's probably only me, but we would have like back-to-back conference calls, and then each one would run like 10, 15 minutes late, and then it became like this cumulative effect where each call was running 15 minutes late, and so then we multiply that by the number of people on the call and say, who would do 4 calls a day? This is a ton of time we're wasting. We came up with a ground rule, and I was so glad it wasn't me. Anyone who's late for the call, anyone who's not on the bridge, that sounds old, I guess I don't have bridges anymore, but anyone who's not dialed onto the bridge, when we call your name for roll call, you must sing a stanza of God Bless America or Star Spangled Banner or whatever on the call. And it sounds silly, it worked. I mean, one day I was late, and then I tried to kind of, play it off. They were like, oh, no, Dana, we want to hear the whole thing, okay? And I had to sing. I was never late again, okay? I don't care if I was in the middle of Publix. I would dial in for that call. I would be sure I was dialed in. So again, you want to use these little things just to encourage people to stay on top of things and be accountable. Ownership means ownership. You must come up with some sort of ground rule about PDAs. I'm not necessarily saying you adopt this one, but I'm saying bring it up to your team and say, how do we want to handle, laptops, iPhones, iPads, Blackberries, Blueberries, Strawberries, all that distracting stuff in our meetings? How do we want to handle it? Now, just curious, do any of you have ground rules around that stuff? No? Oh, can't record, okay. Anybody else? I see people saying no. Yes. And so you've asked them to not bring it? Okay. And it's worked pretty well? See? Sometimes you just got to ask. But I'm telling you, this is the way I word it, okay? I always say, hey, guys, I mean, I know I'm trying to be connected as much as anybody because I can be a violator too, so I get it. But if everyone's kind of half with us, then the hour meeting is probably going to turn into an hour and 20-minute meeting every week. So I'm just wondering, what do we want to do about that? You know, I'm willing to go with the will of the group, but what do you guys think you want to do? And then let them come up with whatever they want. I've had a variety of responses. I've had some teams where they were strict, like she's saying, the guy literally put a basket outside the room and said, when you're coming in, you got to drop all your stuff in the basket, and then you can pick it up. It's like going through TSA. You can pick it up on your way out, you know. That's what worked for them. Then I've had other groups where they said, you know, we're 24/7 support. We have to be reachable. We can't do that. They decided to take technology breaks every 45 minutes. So every 45 minutes, they take a break and kind of check in with technology. So what's important is really not what the ground rule is, but that you come up with some sort of ground rule that you all can abide by. Because then when you start seeing violations, you can address it much more quickly. All right? And then, you know, the risk, we talked about talking about consequences, and then we talked about the last one as well. Now, just in our last few minutes, we've talked a lot about how to deal with things in terms of developing that culture of accountability. You can do all this stuff, all kind of bells and whistles. Maybe you've got one person. It's not really the team. It really is one person over and over and over. That's when you want to try to kick into, okay, a different gear. How do I deal with that individual problem? And the first thing you want to do is customize your response to the cause. Most people typically fail to be accountable either because they can't or they won't. But you've got to discern the difference. Is she not doing it because she can't do it? In which case, what might I want to do? Yeah, either find somebody that can, or training or mentorship or something, but working on the ability side of it. But that's different than, oh, no, she could do it. She just won't do it. Then that's a different conversation. Maybe it's a motivation issue, it's acknowledgement, maybe she's overqualified, maybe she's just not in the right role. So again, it's really, really important to determine what's really the cause. It's like going to a doctor. If they just kind of throw you some pills, but they don't take the time to figure out what's really causing it, the pills probably aren't going to help you a whole lot. So you've got to figure out what's really underneath it. One of the techniques also that I use is the 3 magic questions, because we learned, or I learned years and years ago, we had so many issues with, you ask someone to do something, you delegate, and then you ask them, well, okay, now, you know, do you understand? Now, what's the answer to, now, do you understand? Yes. Does that mean they understood? No. Okay, I've got a 20-month-old. And I promise you, just from my tone and the look on my face, he knows the answer to, now, do you understand? Okay? Doesn't mean they understand. So what we decided was that is a worthless question. We don't ask, do you understand? Instead of asking that for important tasks or for people that we haven't worked with very much, we ask these 3 magic questions. Oh, just tell me, what's your understanding? You're asking them to repeat it back. Why do I want to do that? To make sure they got it, to confirm it. It's amazing. You can say something and they can sit there and smile, and then you ask them to repeat it back, and you wonder if they heard what you said. I mean, they give you a completely different version of what you just said that you wouldn't have gotten if you didn't actually ask. So ask them to repeat it back. Ask them what the deliverable will look like. Because I promise you, a lot of times we use these vague phrases like, oh, I want you to come up with a business plan. I want you to come up with a recommendation, a communications plan. Business plan to you might be completely different than business plan to her. You might be thinking you're sending me an email with 3 paragraphs. You might be thinking an Excel spreadsheet. You might be thinking it's a PowerPoint document with 50 slides in the deck. Get real clear. Is it going to be a Word document? Is it going to be a table? What are going to be the fields in the table? Describe the deliverable. We even got so detailed with our projects that we would literally ask the task owners to give us a sample of what the deliverable was going to look like, or a blank sample, a previous sample, something to ensure we were on exactly the same page. And then the last question, what are the first 3 steps you're going to take to begin working on this task. Again, there's some people that until they tell me that level of detail, I'm not going to be able to sleep at night because I really don't know what they're doing. So that gives me a sense of whether or not we're on the same page. And then again, if they're individuals, I know we're running short on time, so I don't want to go through all of these, but you know, look at what their motivators are, what might motivate them. Maybe they need a little bit of motivation. We talked about the ground rules, but you want to distinguish slacking from another issue. It's not going to help to crack the whip if they're motivated, but they just can't do it. So you've really got to try to figure out what the issue is. If it's serious, you might want to pull them offline, figure out what's going on. I had one woman on my team, I thought she was slacking. I found out like her daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia. You know, but I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't just really taken some time, gone to lunch, tried to figure out what in the world was going on. Maybe assign them a mentor or request an interim deliverable. You need to figure out really carefully and quickly who can I assign something to and I can give them 2 weeks, or who do I need to check in with me maybe every 2 or 3 days to ensure we're really, really on the same path. So with that, I hope that I've shared something that can help you deal with slackers on your team, but more importantly, build this culture of accountability. So feel free to reach out to me anytime. Happy to talk to people. But thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it. Oh, we're going to do our drawing. They're prizes, very important. So don't leave. We've got prizes.